40s. Some of you may be familiar with this. And it evolved into a gospel song, and then it evolved into a civil rights anthem. The whole notion of keep your eyes on the prize. Make sure that you are totally aware of where you're going. Stay focused on what has to be done in order to get from point A to point B in terms of voting rights, civil rights, and rights enshrined in the Constitution that were being ignored.
Silas bound in jail, had no money for to go their bail. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on.
新年快乐. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you all and welcome, and thank you all for coming out tonight for a special presentation of Eyes on the Prize and for a provocative conversation about civil rights in America. I'm Liz Cheng, General Manager of Television here at WGBH, as well as for our national programming service, World Channel. If you're a regular viewer of World Channel, and how many of you are? We love you. You know that World focuses on presenting content about diverse communities, which includes differences of race, ethnicity, religion, abilities, LGBT. Much like WGBH produced Frontline, Nova, Masterpiece, American Experience, and Antiques Roadshow, World original content is produced right here at WGBH and shared with the world. World is reaching new and diverse audiences nationwide on 155 PBS television stations across the nation. So Eyes on the Prize is being shared with generations of viewers across the country each Sunday night at 9 p.m. Nearly 30 years ago, after Eyes was first presented by WGBH, the notion of bringing it back for a new generation of viewers sprang up at a partnership event with Carol Phillip, who's sitting right over here. Encouraged by John Abbott and Ben Godley and Gene Hopkins, our vice president who's standing over there, as well as executive producer of content, Chris Hastings for World Channel, the idea came to fruition thanks to the president of Blackside, Judy Hampton, sister of Henry Hampton. Henry, of course, is the creator and champion of the series. Thankfully, Judy said yes, and Judy's sitting right over there in black and white. With the current national spotlight on issues of race and inequality, as well as the marking of the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act and the 60th anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott, it is the right time for the series to be front and center again as part of the country's essential dialogue on race relations. Eyes can provide perspective for a new generation and be a touchstone for citizens who lived through the decades that the film documents. World executive producer and head of content, Chris Hastings, has pulled together some insightful and poignant storytelling moments from Eyes on the Prize to share with you tonight, and some of these moments include disturbing images. In order to illustrate the civil rights movement back then and now, here's Chris Hastings.
I am amazed that so many people have joined us here tonight for Eyes on the Prize, and I thank you for coming out. Produced by the visionary executive producer Henry Hampton and his production company, Blackside Productions, it has been said that Eyes on the Prize should be the essential viewing for all Americans. As you will see from the selections that we're going to share with you this evening, the storytelling focused not only on the leaders of the day, but the everyday people, the men and women whose extraordinary actions changed the course of this country. Tonight, we share with you 3 clips before our panel discussion. So let's get this started. The first clip we're going to show to you tonight is from the half-hour documentary that we produced for World Channel called Then Eyes on the Prize, Then a Noun. We have been broadcasting it this month on World Channel, and we've been releasing it out to the PBS system as a way to give context for the world that we are today, and to really detail for people, particularly an audience who may not have a understanding of what Eyes on the Prize is. This half-hour special, I think, brings the story of Eyes on the Prize up into 2016. The second clip that we are going to show this evening, and we're just going to show them all together. You know, we're not going to show a whole Eyes on the Prize, but we made some key selections so that you get a feel of it, and it sets up the conversation. Our second excerpt will be from Eyes on the Prize 2, Keys to the Kingdom, a story that really details the busing boycott episodes that happened here in Boston. And then the third clip will be another clip from Then and Now, where we took time and we talked to current civil rights activists from today, but also from the past, to sort of lay out for everyone where we are today, the landscape today. So I hope you are ready. Phillip's going to take over after the clips, because he's the master of the mic. And I share with you Eyes on the Prize and Eyes on the Prize Then and Now. Thank you.
Before Baltimore, there was Birmingham. Before Black Lives Matter, Black Power. Before Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin, Emmett Till. Different decades, same story. America's continuing struggle for equality. No other film captured the triumphs and tragedies of the civil rights movement like the epic series Eyes on the Prize. Tonight, a look back at the series and a look at its impact today. Why this important work matters. Eyes on the Prize, then and now. Funding for this special presentation of Eyes on the Prize, Then and Now, was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation.
This girl here was the first Negro apparently of high school age. She showed up at Temple High School the day that a federal court ordered it integrated. She was followed in front of the school by an angry crowd.
Eyes on the Prize aired in 1987, bringing together for the first time film and first-hand accounts that exposed the long-standing struggle.
I'm tired of marching. Tired of marching for something that should have been mine at birth. We're willing to be beaten for democracy.
Exposed the vicious racism millions of African Americans endured.
We never have any trouble until some of our southern niggas go up north and the NAACP talks to them and they come back home.
The series, comprised of 14 hour-long documentaries, spanned the U.S. civil rights movement in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Nominated for an Academy Award and winning multiple other honors, including the Peabody and Emmy Awards, the films were a major achievement in television history.
It's phenomenal. You know, you're not just making a film, you're making an important historic document that will resonate and have value far beyond its initial broadcast.
Oh, it's the finest series in the history of America on one of its most wrenching problems.
All we would like to do, sir, is to go to the... I'm sure that God will hear your prayer just as well down there as he will up here, but you're not going on this courthouse floor.
But Eyes on the Prize almost didn't get made. It was created only because of one man's persistence, Henry Hampton, founder of Blackside Incorporated, the largest minority-owned film company of the time.
It was Henry Hampton's dream to be able to make a series about the civil rights movement, but told from the perspective of the people that were part of the movement. You know, not so much the experts, not so much the authors, but the people that made it happen, who risked their lives.
I think that Henry just always saw a heroic story. He really saw a long-term story here that looked at a lot of things that were going on in America.
We've got to realize the white folk in the state of Mississippi ain't nothing but a bunch of racists. And the only people who can stop them are the black folk in Mississippi.
When people talk about Steve Jobs being a visionary, Henry had that same kind of vision of what he could do in the future as opposed to the past. Which is interesting because that's what EYES is about. It is about the past, but it's also now, I think it's about the present and the future.
This is what democracy looks like.
Before he was a filmmaker, Hampton had been a young activist in St. Louis and in Boston. He cared deeply about people and the human condition. Most importantly, he joined the pivotal Civil Rights March in Selma, Alabama in 1965.
There's this photo that we had on the wall. We talked about trying to get it into the film. It's Henry at Selma. Henry had marched in Selma. Selma was very near and dear to his heart.
He got his inspiration from actually being on that bridge. He knew at that moment he had to tell that story.
This is an unlawful assembly. You are ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church. I've got nothing further to say to you.
There are a lot of similarities between the civil rights movement and the production of Eyes on the Prize. But one of those similarities is that we didn't know whether we were going to make it. I mean, we never had enough money.
It took 10 years for Henry to raise the money for this. And it was a struggle.
You can imagine raising money for a controversial idea that dealt with some of the sorest problems of the United States of America. EYES started with only about 20 to 30% because Henry realized if the project was not begun, it may never be finished. Fundraising continued all the time that production went on. It was terrifying.
With partial funding in hand, Hampton greenlit 6 episodes, covering the civil rights years from 1955 to 1964, and introducing viewers to the unsung heroes of the time.
We're marching, we're marching up to Zion. We're marching, we're marching up to Zion.
Henry understood in his heart that it had to be not only about the greatness of Dr. King and people like Rosa Parks, but also all of those local leaders. So a lot of what EYES is about is that local leadership and all those local movements.
And that's typified by a piece in the earliest program with Joanne Robinson. She mimeographed 35,000 copies of the Montgomery boycott memo.
I called every person who was at every school and every place where we had planned to be at that, have somebody at that school or wherever it was at a certain time, that I would be there with materials for them to disseminate. I didn't go to bed that night. So I ran off 35,000 copies.
An entire revolution was happening in that city. They were organized. It was the people's Montgomery bus boycott.
We tried to honor that fact, that ordinary people drove this movement.
Hampton also knew he had to make it clear. This was not just an African-American story. It was the story of all Americans.
So I asked the mayor, first of all, Mayor West, do you feel that it's wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of his race or color?
I could not agree that it was morally right for someone to sell them merchandise and refuse them service.
He underlined that from the moment he started hiring staff.
And the producers, because by design, were always black, white, male, female, so there was intentional tension built in by Henry Hampton.
The producers brought their own very different perspectives to the production as they wrestled with what to put in, what to leave out.
And so we'd have these knock 'em down, discussions sometimes around a ping pong table.
And we had terrible fights about how to tell stories and how to get to where we all wanted to get to.
I remember some really bitter fight about how to tell the Untitled story.
Absolutely.
I found out about it 9:30 Sunday morning. I was in bed. I got up, called my mother, when I got the news.
Eventually, we won, but not without having to go through the exercise of recutting that story.
The entire story.
Even the narrator of the show, Julian Bond, was more than just a voice.
What was great about Julian Bond as the narrator is that he himself had been grounded in the civil rights movement. So it's not like he's a narrator, he's a regular voiceover talent, although he's brilliant at it. It was also that he brings that sensitivity of what that movement meant, and that carries through to all of his narration, I think.
As the film team struggled with painful and emotional stories, Hampton struggled with raising the needed funds. It was a high-wire act all the way through. But in 1988, it paid off, with significant awards and reviews touting the series as prized television.
Early in the civil rights movement, segregated schools in the South were the big battleground. Then, the focus turned to northern schools. Once again, white resistance and violence shocked the nation. From the landmark series, Eyes on the Prize, the keys to the kingdom.
Funding for this special presentation of Eyes on the Prize was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation.
I know the one thing we did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Blue skies smiling at me. Nothing but blue skies do I see.
When Brown against the Board of Education was decided, 1954, I happened to be downtown in Nashville, Tennessee, with my high school teacher, and we were buying some materials for the senior class play. I was graduating that year, and I saw the headline on the case, and I said to my teacher, you know, this means that next year all the kids will be going to school together. You know, they won't have to be going to separate schools. And she said, it's not going to happen quite that fast. Not next year.
10 years after the Supreme Court ruled school segregation unlawful, the fight for black progress had moved north to Boston, Massachusetts.
When we fight about education, we're fighting for our lives. We're fighting for what that education will give us. We're fighting for a job. We're fighting to eat. We're fighting to pay our medical bills. We're fighting for a lot of things. So this is a total fight with us.
By the 1960s, a small but growing number of parents and teachers were complaining about conditions in the schools.
Here I was, a brand new teacher, coming into my first teaching experience, and I walked into this old building built in 1842, named after a wonderful New England writer, Louise May Alcott, and I had 42 students, 36 seats. We didn't have new crayons. We had a box of old nubbly crayons. Pencils had to be collected at the end of the day so you would have enough for the children for the next day. There wasn't enough white paper.
Books were often in short supply and sometimes contained lessons that damaged.
And here was this book I found, which had, it had the word niggers in it, 10 little niggers sitting on a fence, 9 little niggers playing in a line, and it was just like 10 little Indians, 9 little Indians, and it was very offensive.
Many of the Negro parents believe that a predominantly Negro school is inferior per se, but we here in Boston do not believe that premise.
Louise Day Hicks said that the schools were fine the way they were. The city's top vote-getter in the mid-60s, Hicks chaired the Boston School Committee. In 1965, 1 in 4 students was black. Only 1 in 200 teachers was black, and there was not one black principal. The NAACP brought parents' concerns to the school committee.
We just wanted them to say, yes, there's segregation in the schools, and we wanted them to acknowledge that the problem exists and to commit themselves to do something about it.
I feel that at this time, any school that is predominantly Negro is an inadequate school.
I didn't hear what you said, Mrs. Johnson.
I said that any school that is predominantly Negro in Boston is an inadequate school.
But Mrs. Johnson, the superintendent of schools has stated as his policy that a racially imbalanced school is not educationally harmful.
Well, Mrs. Hicks, Madam Chairman, may I say this? Superintendent Orenberger and yourself and other committee members do not have children in a racially imbalanced school, so you do not know what the effect is on our children.
The statement that we made to the school committee said that where there were a majority of black students, there was not concern for how these kids learned, that there were crowded classrooms, temporary teachers, not enough books, and supplies were low and all of that kind of thing. Even physical conditions were poor.
Community activists could not force the school committee to acknowledge a problem.
So all that brings, I think it just needs some goodwill and some common sense.
Parents responded with a variety of strategies throughout the mid-60s. They organized one-day school boycotts in freedom schools, but short-term protest was not enough. They ran candidates for the school committee, but they lost. They pushed through a state law outlawing racially imbalanced schools, but the school committee refused to enforce it. Not yet 15% of the city, blacks were a minority too small to strongly influence elections or elected officials. So parents took matters into their own hands. Some set up voluntary programs that moved children to empty seats in white schools.
We decided that where there were a large number of white students, that's where the care went, that's where the books went, that's where the money went. So therefore, our theory was move our kids into that school where they're putting all of the resources so that they can get a better education.
means self-determination.
Other parents took a different approach. Instead of working to integrate white schools, they established their own parent-run independent schools.
Does anybody have any questions? No. Go to work.
Parents saw that public education was not offering young people not only the strong education that they needed, but the social relationships, a recognition of who they were as African Americans just was not happening in the Boston public school system. So there was a real move community-wide to develop institutions that would meet both of those needs.
The black community could not afford to transport all its students to white schools, nor to run its own school system. The battle for quality education would have to be fought in the public schools. That struggle had been going on for a decade. Black parents were not going to give up. The school committee was not going to give in, and most other city leaders did not want to get involved.
I think it's not unfair to say that the business community, the financial community, and I would say the religious community took a walk in the early 1970s, leaving really only the politicians and the parents as the people who cared about the issue. And in a certain sense, the parents got pitted against one another, white neighborhoods against black neighborhoods, in a way that no one had ever bargained for.
In 1972, under NAACP leadership, black parents filed a class action suit against the school committee in federal district court. A confrontation was looming that would change the city in ways never expected.
We filed a lawsuit in the federal court because there was no other place for us to go. It was literally the court of last resort.
Here we go, Boston! Here we go!
In a city where neighborhoods were divided by race, desegregating the schools would mean busing children from one neighborhood to another.
I wouldn't care if they were green or purple. It's the idea of putting my kid on a bus when I have a school right across the street from where they should go. I don't care what color they are.
On June 21, 1974, Federal District Court Judge W. Arthur Garrity ruled that the Boston School Committee was guilty of consciously maintaining two separate school systems, one black, one white. He ordered an immediate remedy, citywide busing, to start in September. Less than a mile separated two of Boston's poorer neighborhoods. Roxbury was the heart of the black community. South Boston was Louise Day Hicks' home and a center of white resistance. Students were to be bused between the two neighborhoods.
When Garrity's decision came down in June of 1974, we were sunk when we heard some of the remedies, the one of busing to South Boston, because those of us who had lived in Boston all of our lives knew that this was going to be a very, very difficult thing to pull off.
With the opening of school only 12 weeks away, political differences among blacks gave way to shared concern for the safety of the children. Freedom House, a Roxbury community center, coordinated black preparations for busing.
One of the objectives during that period over the summer was to assure that there would be a peaceful transition and that we would commit ourselves to do that.
We stand united at this critical time to provide leadership and resource to the parents and children who are residents in our community and those children with their parents who will be attending public schools in this community. We call on other sections in the city to assume the same kind of responsibilities that we are assuming.
Boston is a very hidebound, distrustful, turf-conscious, class-conscious, parochial city full of people who did not make much progress over the years. I'm talking about white folks. They were not middle-income people. They were poor folk, and they were running hard-scrabble operations. And they were scared folk. By the time busing came around, these people were ripe for revolution.
It's tearing them apart. People, as a community, it's tearing them apart. They may say this is helping, it's tearing them apart. I'm not for this, I don't care, my one will not go to school, but it's tearing them apart.
Well, I'm the mayor, and the first recognition is that it's a court order that has to be enforced by the city, that it's a final decision, that it's irrevocable, and that I'm going to be responsible at a minimum for public safety, and at a maximum for the social health. In a way, it's a little exaggerated, but the morals of the town. It's a moral question.
The message was clear. Whites opposed to change in the school system were not going to back down. Most schools were calm, but some were battlegrounds.
When we started up the hill, you can hear people saying, "Niggas go home." There were signs. They had made a sign saying, "Black people stay out. We don't want any niggers in our school." And there were people on the corners holding bananas like we were apes.
As we went up the hill and approached the school, our students got very, very quiet. Where they had been just like any other kid riding a bus, making noise, laughing, talking, suddenly as they approached this place, they got very, very quiet. And then they would have to stay there till the police came over, escorted them out the bus and in through the metal detectors into the school. It was, I began for the first time to say, "Ruth, maybe you shouldn't have gotten involved. Maybe you shouldn't have urged this desegregation." It killed me to see our black students go through that procedure.
It was pretty aggravating, actually, to go and be put off with this before you even started a day at school. You know, it's kind of ridiculous for a 17-year-old person to be treated this way.
On a normal day, there would be anywhere between 10 and 15 fights per day.
The white kids felt intimidated that they had black kids in the school. The black kids were intimidated because they were in this white school and they did not want to be pushed around.
You could walk down the corridor and a black person would bump into a white person or vice versa. That would be one fight, and they try to separate it because at that time it was so much tension in the school.
Just the slightest thing would set it off.
The NAACP surveyed black students on problems at South Boston High.
About a week later, I was sitting in my office one night, and I reached into my briefcase, and here were these forms. So I took them out, and I began sort of absently to read through them. As I read through one after another of these forms, what I saw was that these kids couldn't spell. They could not write a simple declaratory sentence. And as I read these forms, none of which were grammatically correct or spelling proper, I just started to cry. It was impossible to explain the feeling of pain on the one hand, but on the other hand, I knew we were right.
But the fight to correct years of miseducation was overshadowed by fear and violence. In October, a South Boston mob pulled a passing black motorist from his car. A policeman fired shots over the heads of the crowd and pulled the man to safety.
We don't teach our kids to hate anybody. All we want for our kids is to love and to get a decent education and to live decently as human beings. But we're not even distinguished as human beings as far as East Boston goes, or South Boston. We're niggers. And I would be damned if I had any child of mine exposed to anything like that. I wouldn't want my child to sit beside it. Because, see, I'm not going to teach it to hate. And that's what's happening. That's the lesson that those kids have been getting out there in South Boston. Stand beside Mommy, sweetie, and throw a rock at the nigger.
For the first time, the mob violence in South Boston was echoed in Roxbury. Groups of black students roamed the streets, pelting white passersby with rocks.
I deplore the violence that I've read about and seen on television. I think that's most unfortunate.
Whites opposed to busing took heart from Gerald Ford's first press conference as president.
I have consistently opposed forced busing to achieve racial balance as a solution to quality education. And therefore, I respectfully disagree with the judge's order.
Boston was left on its own. The city's neighborhoods grew even more isolated and hostile.
But this city should have been open to everyone, and it wasn't. And it was that fear that if you stepped out of your place, you could be attacked. There was no leadership that said, it's off limits.
I never heard any public official on the state level or on the city level come out and say, this is a good thing, we should all learn together, we should all live together. There was no encouragement from anybody. I call it complete official neglect.
South Boston, December 11th, 1974. A fight at the high school between a black and a white student got out of hand.
I remember the day Michael Faith got stabbed vividly because I was in the principal's office, and all of a sudden you heard a loud commotion and you heard kids screaming and yelling, saying, he's dead, that black nigga killed him, he's dead.
Oh, geez, we were close enough that we saw there was blood, on the hallway floor.
White students left. Rumors spread. South Boston residents and others surrounded the school. The black students were trapped inside.
Everybody with the police off the apron.
Louise Day Hicks appealed to the crowd.
police cars coming up the street, or attempting to, and turning over the police car. And I was just amazed that they could do something like that. And the police tried to get horses up. They wouldn't let the horses get up. They stoned the horses, they stoned the cars. And I thought that day that we would never get out of South Boston High School.
Black community leaders and officials worked out a rescue plan. Volunteers rode decoy buses to the school.
Frankly, we were scared. But we went out, when we got closer to the school, we could hear the noise, and it's like a hollow feeling when you go up that hill.
Finally, it must have been 2:30 or 3 o'clock that afternoon. All of a sudden, all you heard was, you're going out the back door. You're going out the back door. At that moment, we had to run to the buses.
While the decoy buses distracted the mob at the front of the school, other buses pulled up to the back. The black students and leaders made it out of South Boston safely. Michael Faith did not die, but his stabbing and the ensuing riot further polarized the city. The school committee stiffened its resolve not to comply with the court order. In response, Judge Garrity placed 3 members in contempt of court.
It seems to me that Judge Garrity is going to bring us this plan with the boot of official authority and the uniform. In a certain sense, you can say that Reconstruction has finally come to the North with a vengeance.
In the face of school committee intransigence, the schools were run by the court. Judge Garrity's was the final word on curriculum, hiring and firing, and policy.
I mean, just time will change these people's minds, in your opinion?
No, I think, no, not necessarily. I think that time will bring about an understanding on the part of most people that there's no alternative but to compliance with the principles set out by the Supreme Court of the United States.
Over the next few years, resistance continued. In the first 2 years of desegregation, almost a third of the white students left the system. Over time, the court gradually forced changes in the Boston public schools, but the cost remained high.
What do you think is going to happen when you go to school?
When we go up there, we're going to be stoned. It's not fair to me, because why is the other way around when they come up here? When they come up here, we won't mess with them, so why when we come up there, they mess with us?
What do you think about the people of South Boston, Joanne? If you had a message you'd like to tell them, what would it be?
Yeah, I don't think it's fair. It's not fair to me.
The greatest changes were not found in the schools. In 1977, Louise Day Hicks' political career ended in defeat. And for the first time in the 20th century, a black candidate won election to the Boston School Committee.
I felt that what took place absolutely had to happen. It may not have had to happen that way if there had been a different kind of leadership provided by white Bostonians of all classes and all neighborhoods. However, when you're the anvil, you bear, and when you're the hammer, you strike, and we were striking, and there was no turning back.
I was about 13 when I first saw Eyes on the Prize. It made a really profound impact on me to see the role that young people played. People were saying, we are not waiting any longer. We refused to live the way that our parents did. And they really were the impetus behind a lot of what happened. So I really carried that with me when I was really making the decision to do what I did.
First family of the United States of America.
The presidential campaign of Barack Obama awoke the spirit of American youth in a way that was similar to what we had seen. And then the horrors began. Trayvon Martin happened, Michael Brown happened, and Sandra Bland happened, Anisha McBride happened. It kept happening, and Black Lives Matter happened.
Black Lives Matter started in July 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, and many of us were disturbed, concerned, angry that George Zimmerman was let off for the murder of Trayvon Martin. Alicia Garza wrote a love note to Black people on social media, and she closed it off with Black Lives Matter. And the moment I saw those 3 words, I hashtagged them.
Now, the strategy is different because we have cell phones. We have proof.
Social media has changed the game. I think it's changed the movement. Because before, mainstream media could choose what it would cover and it could choose to ignore. It is democratizing the media. So I think that is what is different about this new burgeoning movement, is that there are a lot more voices, there are a lot more platforms.
One of the things that Eric Garner's movement did was make everybody understand the value of cell phones. Eric Garner was only believed because that young man videotaped it. And him saying 11 times, "I can't breathe." I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Social media has really been able to bridge that gap and be the engine that we go to and turn to get the information we need and to link up with one another. There are activists that I'm connected with in other cities that I've never met personally, but we work just as well together.
So it is definitely a diverse movement. We have tons of folks of all different races who are involved and contributing. We find ourselves in the middle of, the climate change conversation. We find ourselves in the middle of immigration reform. We find ourselves in the middle of all of those different movements, and we're about uplifting and working across them.
For us, this is the new human rights movement. The reason why we want to call it a human rights movement is because that's international in scope. That allows for us to have a conversation that's beyond U.S. borders.
The message is there's a new generation that has been awakened, and there were people who came before us who were very, very strong.
I guess our courage came out because we didn't have nothing, that we couldn't lose nothing. But we wanted something for ourselves and for our children. And so we took a chance with our lives.
Instead of running away from the blast, running away from the Klansmen, I said to the Klansman police that came, he said, "Reverend, if I were you, I'd get out of town fast as I could." I said, "Officer, you're not me. You go back and tell your Klan brethren that if God could keep me through this, then I'm here for the duration." I think that's what gave people the feeling that I wouldn't run, I didn't run, and that God had to be there.
And so we now have that. We are now products of that, and we're taking this to the next level. I think we're always going to deal with there being different tactics and different ideologies for how we should go about fighting in this struggle. We have to be able to draw on the wisdom of those who came before us in order for us to continue in their legacy and in their path.
Dr. King, I understand, used to call it creative tension. And out of the tension, we move forward.
My advice to activists: study the lessons of the early civil rights movement. Before any sit-in, before any march, before any standing at a theater, we prepared ourselves. Read the literature, watch Eyes on the Prize.
How long can we be patient? We want our freedom, and we want it now.
Never give up, never give in. You're going to have a great victory. There'll be some setbacks, there'll be some disappointments, but I'm very hopeful, very optimistic that we will get there one day.
When the series first aired, jobs and freedom were the prize. So, what's the prize today?
The prize now is protecting the freedoms they won and getting the rest, and equality, because the gap economically, the gap educationally, the gap in terms of the criminal justice system is still there. So we are free in some areas, but not equal.
The prize today is still freedom. Can I sleep at night? When my 25-year-old son is driving across country in a family car, when my 23-year-old is out just a little later than she said she would be. Can I trust that when they come into contact with people who we regard in positions of authority, can I trust that they're going to come home okay?
Can my humanity be respected if I'm a person of color, if I'm a woman, if I'm a gay brother, sister, whatever I am, can I be respected for who I am? That's what Eyes on the Prize taught us. This is a journey, and you're going to pick up small victories along the way, but you never stop, because that big prize is that we all really are equals.
Thank you to Chris and the World Team, because that was a wonderful special. So now we have our panel. So if our panelists can come up, and Phillip. Phillip Martin is the senior investigative, this is called Vamping in Television while our guests get ready. Senior investigative reporter for WGBH News, and he's an award-winning radio journalist. Early in his career, he worked as senior editor for National Public Radio and was NPR's first national race relations correspondent. He was part of the team that helped to create the international radio program, The World. Located right down the hall here and co-produced with the BBC and Public Radio International. Since joining WGBH in 2010, Phillip has reported on human trafficking, the Boston Marathon bombing, police shootings, race relations, and has just returned from New Hampshire, covering the presidential election. Judy Richardson served, as you saw in the film, as a series associate producer and education director for Eyes on the Prize. Her filmmaking career has been informed by her early years and ongoing involvement with social justice issues, beginning with her work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Next, Melissa Nobles is the Kenan Sahin Dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, as well as Professor of Political Science at MIT.
I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank you for being here today. It's quite remarkable when you think about how the present and the past fuse so seamlessly quite often, and quite often shamelessly. But there's also a past and a present that also fuse together in ways that are just absolutely astounding in terms of where we are today. In terms of this particular documentary, Eyes on the Prize, and some of the people in this very audience. I was thinking about it. Valerie, where are you, Valerie? Valerie worked on Eyes on the Prize. She is the executive producer of Basic Black. Barbara Howard is here, who is, where are you, Barbara? Barbara Howard, another person. Judy Vecchione is here as well. And of course, there's Judith right here. And Marita Rivera, also somewhere here in the audience. That so many people who are basically making such a mammoth contribution today, inspired by the events of the civil rights movement, and continuing to make the type of contributions that are necessary in order to make Black lives matter, in order to make some of the issues that we are focused on in this vast world of ours matter. Human trafficking, human rights. Smitty right here, who every year is involved in a race amity project that brings the issue of race into sharp focus. It's extraordinary. Let's talk about this term, or this phrase, eyes on the prize. I'm not going to try to sing it for you, because I don't have a great voice. But this was an old civil rights song that you may be familiar with. You hear it at the start of each of the documentary programs that comes on. Keep your eyes on the prize, oh Lord. This came from a song called Gospel Plow out of the 1940s. Some of you may be familiar with this. And it evolved into a gospel song, and then it evolved into a civil rights anthem. The whole notion of keep your eyes on the prize. Make sure that you are totally aware of where you're going. Stay focused on what has to be done in order to get from point A to point B in terms of voting rights, civil rights, and rights enshrined in the Constitution that were being ignored. And I was talking with Judy today. Judy, that's right. I was talking to Judy today about the provenance of this title.
Let me just
well,
go
I'm going to mention
memo.
one thing. I'm going to mention one thing. One of the things that happened in the film here is that in the preface, is we were talking about how you guys fought over some of the tiniest things. You even fought over the title.
Well, when I suggested the title, I was the only person there. It's 1978-79. It's Capital Cities Communications is about to fund us for what was then going to be a 1, maybe 2-hour documentary. Capital Cities had not yet bought ABC TV and sold it to Disney. They were small distributors. And so I'm sitting there by myself because Henry hadn't got the full funding yet. Steve Thayer recently, a few years ago, sent me a memo that I sent out. Because, see, Henry's title was originally America, We Loved You Madly. That was his title. I hated it. Now, and I made no bones about it. Now, and he got that title from Duke Ellington, the great band leader and composer, who at the end of a concert would throw his arms wide to the audience and say, I love you madly. And Henry loved the play on words of madly, right? Okay, so I'm sitting there for the first 6 months. Steve Thayer, I was the first full-time employee. Finally, we get production team in. And I have this memo that Steve Thayer sent me. And Steve Thayer was the series writer and many other things. So it says, to Cap Cities folks from Judy, October 9, 1979. Program title, y'all know how much I dislike the current working title. I'm right up front. I have therefore perused Freedom Song titles for your alternatives. Herein is the list. I'm not wedded to any of them. Some I kind of like. Also, I'm circulating these mainly to get us thinking about possibilities. Also, since they're all related to actual freedom songs, there is a tie-in musically. Also think about reworking any of the below or adding your own. There is no, underline no, order of preference on this listing. So I start with moving on and, Light of Freedom and the Freedom Trail. Number 6 says, by the way, there are 22 titles on here. Number 6 says their eyes on the prize or keep your eyes on the prize. Then I got, Cry for Freedom. Okay, then I got number 22 says, we placed our trust in the Lord and they beat the hell out of us anyway. and then there's a little asterisk that says, my favorite. Yes. Now, Henry really is, he still is opposing this, but everybody on the production team in 1979 is saying, we don't like the title either. Let's figure out. Okay. Steve Thayer said to me, he said, when the real eyes, the first 6 hours is about to go on air. Steve, is still saying to Henry, you picked the wrong title. They'll never get it. So that's the story.
It's clear that when Liz and Chris decided to refocus on Eyes on the Prize, the issues that are with us now resonated greatly and continue to resonate. By the way, I should also mention that one of the producers who's not here today is Callie Crosley, whose contribution should also be acknowledged here today. And Melissa Nobles has researched something that's extraordinary, which is the fate of individuals who died during the civil rights movement. Sometimes, we get so used to hearing about the civil rights movement, it almost becomes antiseptic for many people. But think about it, close your eyes for a second, and go back to a period where you may never have realized because you weren't even born then. But you go back to a period, dark nights, extremely dark nights, no street lights, traveling on dark roads, and this is where people disappeared, in rivers, in lakes, in forests, in streams. And we don't know about a lot of these people because they were not famous. But some of their names are enshrined on a fountain at the Southern Poverty Law Center, where the water runs down along that famous biblical saying. Who knows that famous biblical saying that I can't remember?
All right.
Somebody does.
Somebody does.
Rolling down like, well, anyway.
Right.
Thank you. Someone read their Bible. Thank you very much. But Melissa has basically looked at what happened to some of these people whose names we don't know. who disappeared on some of these dark streets and roads. Melissa, can talk about your research and how it was impacted by Eyes on the Prize.
There is thank you, Phillip, and it's really a joy and a real honor to be here this evening. So my research basically looks at the period actually before the Civil Rights Movement, so the Jim Crow era that precipitated why we needed a movement. And a big part of it is looking at the violence, which has heretofore been understudied and I think underappreciated. We all have a sense that it was a violent era, but we typically think about it in terms of segregation of schools and disenfranchisement and voting. But an enormously important part of that, of the South, was that it was essentially an authoritarian state. What made it authoritarian was that obviously it was undemocratic if you have a section of the electorate that can't vote. So you have citizens who cannot vote, and therefore elected officials feel absolutely no obligation. You had employers who needed labor, cheap labor, which African Americans supplied. And you also needed a system of enforcement to keep them that way. And part of that was the coercion, both violence and then the social mores of Jim Crow, which required undue deference and the like, the things we know that characterize Southern life. And then the Civil Rights Movement comes, and white mobilization begins in force to stop civil rights. And scholars have looked at the Civil Rights Movement and have studied, in a way, its violence, although, honestly, we still don't have a sense of that. We get it beautifully, and I use that word with some hesitation, in Eyes on the Prize. It shows kind of the day-to-day indignities and such which characterized when Black people began to stand up and demand freedoms. But what had characterized our existence before then had been just a routine violence which is really still not known. So I work along with Margaret Burnham, which some of you probably know, at Northeastern Law School. And
former SNCC staffer.
Yes, some former SNCC staff, exactly right. We've been working together to pull basically a database and begin to essentially unearth crimes that have not been studied, sadly. And certain relatives are still alive, and we meet them, and we had one story when someone said, "How did you find out about my father? He was murdered in 1948 in Houston, Mississippi, on a Saturday morning for being in a buggy with horses, and for his horse buggy going too slowly, and some young white men passed by 3 or 4 times and said, 'Nigga, get off, stop hogging the road,' and he didn't move off quickly enough, so they murdered him in front of his family." They moved to Chicago, and when we contacted them, they said, "How did you find out about what happened to my father?" And we said we just looked at read some books, and there was one sentence of a man, Malcolm Wright, murdered in Houston, Mississippi, and we followed up on it. And we find actually there's a lot more in the local presses and the like, but the point of this is this: what Eyes did is that it opened up our eyes and opened up our eyes to an important period of American history from the experience of those who lived under segregation, and showed how ordinary people challenged the status quo that we thought couldn't be challenged. But what we haven't done in our narratives now going into the 21st century is dealt adequately with the coercion and state violence that informed that period from slavery until now. That's what Black Lives Matter seems to me most important, is that it's finally shining a light on the violence of the American state. Now, we all know it in the way we're talking about gun violence and such. In a way, we know how deeply violent our society is in ways which are deeply disturbing, even if we've got the Second Amendment. But what we haven't well dealt with is the dimensions of violence that have been a part of racial subordination, and that's what my research is about.
And part of it is the way that history is taught.
Exactly.
It's often disassociative. When you look at the connections between slavery, Reconstruction, we talk about it in linear ways, but we also don't talk about it in structural ways.
Right.
We talk about individual lynchings as opposed to, as you pointed out, state violence.
Right.
The connection of let's talk about Eyes on the Prize and how it was made and how those connections were made. And Judy, 1987, you finally have the documentary that you want. You're starting to create a series. Eyes on the Prize. 1987 is a pivotal year. How did you connect the dots to the period from beginning in, you started in the 1950s, but you associate, you reference events in the 40s, also in the 30s throughout the documentary. Talk about how you connected the dot, how you taught history.
Well, part of it is, I mean, we really story told the civil rights movement. We story told it to the point that we had a 3-act structure. I mean, the producers really had a format that you were supposed to follow so that you would really attract people. Now, within that format, you could backstory, but not so much. You know, so we don't go, for me, back probably as much as we might in terms of giving, you know, that you've got in 1951, 52 in Mount Bayou, Mississippi, 10 to 15,000 black folks meeting with the Regional Conference of Negro Leadership. But you can't tell really that story because it's, you know, but you can tell Medgar Evers. And you can at least have Amzie Moore appear, who was part of that Regional Council of Negro Leadership. The main thing I think that is so important about when EYES comes out is that it's a game changer. It absolutely, I mean, as amazing as Dr. King was, he was not the only person, right? And so anyone who was part of that movement understood that. Well, what it means is that if you keep saying it's only Dr. King and how amazing he was, then you don't do what EYES did, which is that you show young people, oh, I'm up on that screen. My cousin and my aunt and my clergy and they see themselves in that movement, and they see themselves not just as soldiers and troops, they see themselves as leaders in that movement, right? Because if you don't see yourself, then you don't know you can do it again. That's what EYES does. And it's for the first time, when I'm sitting up there as, you know, as in 1978, the only thing I find is Montgomery to Memphis, and it's only about Dr. King, and it's only where Dr. King goes. So when he goes into Birmingham, you don't know Reverend Shuttlesworth has been working those grounds before any of us get there. When you go into Selma, you don't know that it's Mrs. Selma, I'm looking at her. Okay, well, anyway, an amazing woman who had a voters league, she and her husband from the 40s, right? And so you don't know all of that groundwork that's being done before SNCC or CORE or SCLC. Any of them get in there. That's what EYES does. We see ourselves as regular people, as leaders in that movement, and we can do it again. That's what it does.
And what you also did was illuminate the role of women, for example.
Yes.
It's so important.
Yes.
One of the, I must say, a pivotal moment.
Mrs. Boynton. Oh, sorry.
Please, go on.
Amelia Boynton, that's her name.
Okay, all right. Like yourself, I'm sure, like, when you heard about Emmett Till, of course, this happened before EYES, in terms of your knowledge of Emmett Till. But it came to me when, I remember my mom showed us Jet Magazine. Who else said that?
Jet.
Exactly, Jet Magazine. Who remembers that? Yeah. I mean, one of the most poignant and disturbing photographs I ever saw. My mom could not read, but what she did was she went out and bought a bunch of Jet magazines, and she handed it out to everyone. She was so shocked by what happened in the area where she's from, the American South. It's the reason she left. And I'm wondering, in terms of, I want to talk to both of you about this. In terms of Emmett Till, this was the first of the Eyes on the Prize documentaries. Why did you begin there?
Well, I must say, I'm going back and forth. So I will say, the reason I think it was important that the production team, and we're going to acknowledge you all at the end, that they did that was because, and you still get this. I get this from when I was visiting Professor Brown, when I'm doing lectures. Young people who may not say it directly to you because they know, I'm coming from the movement and it would be discourteous, but what they're really thinking is, how come y'all took it so long? I wouldn't have taken all that. I remember being at one of the high schools here, and it was during the Stewart case. Charles Stewart. Okay. Now, I'm sitting there, and I have just shown these ninth graders the Birmingham segment where you see young people going down, and you hear Julian Bond saying in narration, 700 young people got arrested that day. And you see these young people, young black kids, going down underneath the jail. Okay. So I turned off. I said, well, how many of you, would do that? Well, no, I wouldn't have done that. And I said, well, why not? Now, these are kids who were trying to figure out why we didn't fight back. And okay. And so I said, well, Judy, oh, no, I know. I asked whether they would be willing to do that. But then the next thing was, Well, how many of you know somebody who has been stopped by one of the police during the Stewart case? Because it was all up in Grove Hall. I mean, they were jacking young. Okay. And so I said, well, how many people have been jacked up yourselves? And some of the young guys put their hands up. And then I said, well, how many know somebody? Everybody in that 9th grade class put their hands up. And I said, well, so did any of you, fight back against that? And they looked at me like I was crazy, right? And I said, so, well, why not? We would have been killed. Hello. You get the concept. If the whole power of the state is amassed against you and you're trying to either integrate lunch counters or trying to get black people registered to vote without getting them killed, then there's certain things you do. They understood the concept, but that was through practical part. And Emmett Till does that. Emmett Till shows this is the lay of the land. The federal government is against you. It is controlled by Southern white racists. Not so different from today. But anyway, you got the control of the federal government in the hands of people who do not see you as human. And then you've got a Supreme Court, which at least in '54 is changing a little bit. But it's, so, and certainly in the South, you've got terrorists. And they're not only the Klan, they're the White Citizens Council, they're the people who run the banks. So, given that, what you gonna do? And Emmett Till shows you the power that the state has. It's what Melissa's talking about.
And the imagery of Emmett Till, anything comparable today, Tamir Rice, for example, what Emmett Till did in terms of photography, in terms of the imagery, was to energize a movement, was to scare, was to frighten, was to anger a populace.
Right. Well, arguably, yeah, you could say that much of the Eric Gardner video, the Tamir Rice video, all of those bring home, in a way, as the casket that Emmett Till's mother allowed to be open, to evoke and kind of mobilize people. So it does absolutely show the power of imagery, but what it also shows, I think, is for all of the power that it has today, since we've seen so many and since imagery is ubiquitous now, although it is powerful, I hesitate to say this, but I'm not sure if it's been as powerful in a way because we're now kind of accustomed to seeing it.
Precisely.
So in a way, what made the imagery of Emmett Till so powerful was that it was singular in a way, right? I mean, people imagine, there are images, of course, there were the postcards of lynchings and such. So it's not as if people had not ever seen images of violence and of kind of the spectacle of savagery, right? So it's not as if people were unaccustomed to seeing that, but we didn't see it in quite the same ways. And also what made her decision so important was that she quite deliberately said, I want the world to see, right? She could have said, I don't want the world to see the way my child was so disfigured. But she made the choice, an individual choice of a parent, right? As mothers are doing today, I want you to see what happened to my child, and I want you all to be as horrified as I am. And she used the black press. So I want to put in a pitch for the press here today and in the past of bringing to light things that the white press wouldn't necessarily have picked up on, and certainly Jet magazine and Ebony and the like. But Jet was the main one, kind of focusing on that. So it's similar, but I think what's different today is kind of the ubiquity of video, which on the one hand enhances, and on the other hand I think kind of numbs us away. We kind of live now in virtual worlds, and I'm not always sure that the videos are as compelling, in part because we also interpret videos the way we want to. We don't always see. A lot of people saw the Eric Gardner thing. Not everyone saw a murder.
Yes.
Everyone saw Rodney King. We all didn't see a beating, right? So videos don't necessarily settle anything. They just change the conversation.
And speaking of conversation, we'd like to open this up to you as well. And Liz, is it that time or?
Okay, then I had that thing. Okay, so hello. Before we get to Q&A, two things. One is I would like to just mention, and this is a shameless thing. You mentioned SNCC Legacy Project.
Shameless is okay.
Oh, shameless is good. Okay, fine. One of the many second lives of these interviews and of what Eyes on the Prize is that the archives for all of the Blackside series Eyes on the Prize, Great Depression, War and Poverty, Black Arts in the 20th Century. All of them are housed at Washington University in St. Louis. So we're in the midst of a 4-year project, SNCC Legacy Project, with Duke University. Have a wonderful site, and we are using some of the footage that is made available through WashU. So some of the pieces, Amzie Moore, Mrs. Blackwell, those folks are now on the website that is total and open. So I'm going to give you the www for it. It is www.voteSNCC.org. Has 110 profiles up, mainly the local people who nobody usually knew about. So, having said that, then the next thing is to acknowledge the Blackside people. First of all, could those who actually worked on Eyes on the Prize stand up? Stand up. Eyes on the Prize peoples.
Oh, wow.
Yes. All right now. And while you're still standing, anybody who worked at Blackside. Anybody who worked at Blackside. Thank you.
I got to tell you, I appreciate that. There's far more people than I thought. This is fantastic. So if you have some questions, and I think we can open this up. I just want to refer to something that Melissa was just saying. To me, the first, again, Eyes on the Prize segment, that on Emmett Till, another reason it's powerful and somewhat shocking is if you think about it, this country had thousands of lynchings that preceded Emmett Till. Photographs that are just absolutely shocking. And those which were basically sanctioned or given license by the state, which refused to basically intervene. Anti-lynching laws were anathema to Congress, for example. And so I'm again wondering about the role of the state in terms of perpetuating, continuing to abide by what things that we all consider, unacceptable. And so I'm just going to throw that out there as one idea for discussion in the context of Eyes on the Prize. Now, for you, who would like to ask a question? Because we'd love to hear from you.
And are there mics somewhere?
And there's
Okay.
one mic here from this gentleman, and there's another mic there.
Okay.
Don't all rush up. Boom.
She got you.
Okay.
Anybody in this area here?
Hi, my name is Sarah Jackson. I'm a faculty member at Northeastern University.
Hey, Sarah.
And I teach about contemporary Black activism. So my question is contextual about the making of the then and now. I'm wondering how you, whose voices you decided to include. I noticed in the clip that we watched that it was predominantly women activists and organizers, which I really appreciate since Black Lives Matter was founded by women activists. But I just sort of wondered if there was, we could get some insight into the behind the scenes of, how did the then and now get made and how were choices made? How was that story told? Was it the same 3-part format? Some details about that.
I think this is a Chris, and there he is. All right.
So when we came up with the concept, we really wanted to make sure that we were relevant to what was happening today. And the voices that you see are people who are out there trying to drive change. And so it was a thoughtful sitting around talking about who are the people who can talk about what was happening today. And so the women you see are the women who are out there behind the scenes, on the front line, in the protests, who are making these headlines on Twitter and Facebook and really are the ones who are the activists of today. And they're the everyday people today who are out there, who are part of Black Lives Matter and all the movements that are happening. And as things pop up, they're all over the country. They're not just in one particular area. There was one activist that was shown here. She's a woman who runs Black Lives Matter here in Boston. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were giving a good contemporary look of what a movement looks like today. And so some of those people are people you probably have never seen on TV. Bree Newsom was sort of my own personal, I've really wanted Bree Newsom. Just because when you think about the iconic image of her going up on the flag, that's something we're going to remember for a long time, because somebody said, just take it down, so she took it down. And so it made the special look really good. So, thank you.
And one of the, Yancey is her last name, the young woman activist here in Boston who Chris is referencing. Are there other questions? Please.
Tell everybody who you are.
So my name is Cherie Butts, and I'm a scientist at Biogen. So one of the things, I grew up in Texas, and so coming from the South, we know the jokes that people in the North tell about how racism is really a Southern problem. I really like the fact that this film highlights that it's not just below the Mason-Dixon, but I've also found that New England culture is extremely different from the South. Like, if you see someone in the South, if you see someone with a redneck, you know to avoid them. Here, it's a little bit more creative, so my question is more of, what is the approach, given the fact that, you can spot them very easily in the South, and you sort of know how to speak to them or not. But in New England, what is the right approach? Because they hide, but they're there.
Thank you.
I'm going to leave it to you two.
Gosh. I will say I lived here. I came from the South, and then I get through New York, and I'm 4 years in the midst of police brutality in New York City under Mayor Koch and his, it's everywhere, right? I think what's important, and by the way, we should mention that the main producer on this Voiceless segment was Jackie Shearer, who was born and bred in Boston. Let's hear it for Jackie. I will say that when I lived up here in 78, 79, and then I went back down to Jackson to do a pre-interview. When I came back up and I landed at the Back Bay train station, I couldn't get a cab to pick me up, right? And now I had just been in Jackson. I had not been in Jackson since I had been in Mississippi in '64. But when I had just come back from there, I came back from places where the white waitress is saying, "Y'all come?" Where they are just, you get the Southern courtesy. Now, it masks a whole lot of stuff, but at least you get the veneer. Okay. Up here, there was no bones about it. I have a friend, as a matter of fact, some of you know Jennifer Lawson. Her husband, Tony Giddens, was the first manager of our bookstore, which became the largest black bookstore in the state. I have a lot of little tributaries that I put in on my stories. Okay, so it was called Drum and Spear Bookstore in DC. And so her husband, Tony Giddens, when you see that Howard University takeover story in the second series of Eyes, that's because I knew Tony. Tony had just come back, and we wanted to tell a story that said, not only are we black people talking to make white people understand our humanity, sometimes we're talking to each other. And sometimes we need to say to Howard University, yes, you should be able to play jazz in the music room. It should not be considered too low to play in the music. Okay, so, now, see, I used to be able to go off in these tributaries. Wait a minute, I'm gonna get there, wait a minute.
We know how that goes.
Yeah, okay. So I was talking about Jennifer, and
Get back there.
Thank you. Okay, so Jennifer is married to Tony Giddens. Okay, now Tony said, and he also, became DC Council on the Arts and da-da-da. Okay, I asked him when I was up here, and I said, when I was living up here, I said, "Oh, Tony, when are you going to come visit?" And he said, "I'm not coming up there. Last time I was up there was the last time I was called nigger. I'm not coming up there." Okay, so it is that too. I can say now also after 24 years up here in November of 2014, I moved back to DC. So, I think you manage because you figure out where a community is, and the community will have, what was amazing about Blackside is that you had amazing white people, who really were as committed to telling this story. I should say, some of my best friends are, but no, it's like, but no, who really were committed to telling these stories. And when they talk about the tension, not everybody, I can say that sometimes you got tired of explaining black stuff to white people. You do. But that happens everywhere, okay? What you had here, though, was the importance of white and black people struggling over what they all understood was absolutely essential storytelling and history and stuff that we needed to get out. and the crew that's in. I mean, the reason I feel so good about seeing all my peeps here is because those are people whose bonds, you know, are strong. Anyway, that's a long story, but yeah.
Please. My name's Wendell Bishop. Ta-Nehisi Coates speaks a lot about negative things coming out of black communities are a symptom of a fear of physical violence. So it's not a question. I just want Ms. Nobles to kind of speak about her research as it equates to that.
What can I say about that? I mean, it's certainly, I haven't read all of the book, so I can't speak to that particular argument. But it's certainly true that the concern about basic human security can distort behaviors. It distorts behaviors in certain ways on both sides, right? That is, for whites who are perpetrating violence, it is always this notion of threat. They feel threatened. There's fear. And it seems, at least by my view, certain of those fears is a pretty low threshold to feel fearful. Like, you're here, right? Sometimes appears to be the threshold. Sometimes it's a little bit higher. And blacks, in turn, feel fearful. Now, we feel fearful. I mean, there's lots of violence, and some of it's black on black, and some of it's white on black. But for those, when it's police officer and black citizen, which is the one about which I think we are most vexed, in part because we all have to live under police, right? And there are ways in which you want police when they protect you, right? If there's harm, you want protection. So it's a pretty important dynamic to have sorted out for any citizen to feel that they can trust the police. And so that's a long kind of severed, that's a complicated relationship that American policing has with African Americans that dates back really to after slavery. And we're still kind of sorting that out. And some of it has to do with what it means to be a citizen in the US. I mean, that's what we're talking about in a way. Kind of the prize is full citizenship. And we're opening it. And our country today is a lot better than it was in 1965. And it's going to be a lot better still. And our discussions now, political conversation now, about take our country back and the rest of it, has something to do with we are trying to figure out what the boundaries are of our community. And some people want to restrict them, and some want to open them. It seems to me that's the issue. And for us, a part of being a part of a community is feeling as if your physical safety, you have some safety in your personhood, and we don't have it yet. And it's going to require, right, kind of the attention that we see now beginning with talking about the practicing of policing. It's not the talk about policing. It's like, how do you train officers, right, so that when they're in certain situations, they don't go for deadly force immediately when they see us? Because I can't imagine that they don't have encounters with white people, but they don't end up dead. So there has to be something. I mean, that's where we are. But that had been a part of Jim Crow, right? I mean, it had been, deference. How do you behave? Don't sass me, nigga. Now, I wasn't born. I was born in '63. So I'm going on what I saw in Price. Right? But some part of it had to do with your body behavior had to display deference. Right? And we're not the only country that has those kind of customs, right? Nearly all customs where you have stratified societies, there are nonverbal cues about your place. And when you your body looks differently. If you carry yourself with a certain carriage, you're sending a signal, right? Officers, black soldiers, when they came back from World War II and they were having encounters with policemen, particularly bus drivers on buses. This is some of what our researchers found out. I didn't know. Did you know that in Atlanta, bus drivers were armed? Yeah. They were armed. And we're trying to figure out it was only on, if we don't know this, so we don't know if it was for the whole city or only on the black lines. But whatever the case, you're effectively deputizing bus drivers. And bus drivers took offense when black soldiers came on the bus and they stood like this because they just come back from the war. It was their carriage. And in some ways, what's going on today is about carriage. It's about kind of how now whites kind of look at it and say, well, you need to be quiet when the cops say something to you, shut up. We don't, evidently we see it a little bit differently. We kind of think perhaps saying, officer, why are you doing this to me isn't necessarily an infringement. We're not necessarily taking our lives into our own hands. But evidently, so that's kind of where we are today. And in that regard, it seems to me the legacy of civil rights continues, right? It is those basic interactions between black citizens and police officers, black citizens and other citizens. We as all of citizens of the US, that's what's at stake today.
And that fear that you talk about, Melissa, it's, could it also be interpreted as rationalizations? The fear may be real, but it's rationalizations. Tamir Rice, 12 years old, looked like a grown man.
Exactly.
Dan Roy Henry in this area was drunk.
Was drunk, right, with
the
the car.
kid
Yeah,
in
the kid
Ferguson had robbed a store.
Right.
These various rationalizations, and you see it throughout Eyes on the Prize, where individuals say, if you hadn't done this, or as the bigot says at the very beginning of one of the clips we saw here, if they hadn't come down here being inculcated by the NAACP, I don't think inculcated was his word.
Yeah.
But, then we would not be having these problems.
Yeah.
Do you see that as akin?
Yeah, no, I think that is true. And I think certain of the rationalization has to do, kind of masks what's at the bottom of this, which is in a certain way a disregard for human life, right? That's why Black Lives Matter, right? That you can't so easily discard with our lives. They matter to us, if they don't matter to you, right? But they ought to matter to you, right? I mean, we're humans, right? So I think that's what it kind of rationalizes, is that I have a decision to make, and I'm making a split decision, and it may not matter if I kill you. I may not be punished for it. People will understand, because there's a vast reservoir of fear that I can draw, and I can say, you threatened me, I had a gun, you had a gun, you know how you people are, blah, blah, blah. And people, we nod and go, yes, this officer, everyone felt afraid, blah, blah, blah. So there's a reservoir of explanation that goes along with action.
Okay. Please.
Hi, I'm Daryl Settles.
Daryl.
First, I want to thank everyone that was involved with the production of Eyes on the Prize. I'm actually from the South, and this movie or series was my first real dose of Black life and the education of Black America. So thank you very much. I don't know if this is a question, but I'm wondering, with the way it was back then and the way it is today, not a lot has changed. And we almost to an election where Donald Trump might become president of the United States of America. My comment is, when it comes to Black businesses and the Black business community, it has almost gone the opposite direction. We have less successful Black businesses today than we had 20 years ago. So the conversation is, what are we going to do about the future to make it a better place for all of us? And if you were to rewrite a film 10 years from now, how would you describe this period?
Thanks, Daryl. Judy?
Well, hello, Daryl. I remember the restaurant.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Restaurant name.
Daryl.
Daryl.
No, before that. No. Bob the chef, thank you very much. A couple of things. One is, it was very important during the movement that we had Black businesses, in the same way it was important that we had the Black press. One of the things we couldn't say, for example, in Montgomery, was that one of the ways the word gets out is through the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and the fact that they're running back and forth and depositing the Chicago Defender, or the Philadelphia Inquirer, or the Pittsburgh Courier, or the Baltimore Afro, at little places all along their route, and that's how the Black community is getting news about some of these activities. But I would also say, when we got in jail, certainly we had wonderful attorneys, both Black and white, but you also had to have people who would post bond for you. And the Black businesses were really important to that. I don't know what I would put in if we were doing a current serials. To the question the young woman mentioned in terms of who was in then and now, What's amazing to me, I think, is that, well, I should say, when I mentioned the meeting, the collaboration that the SNCC Legacy Project is having over these 4 years with Duke, we in September did a voting rights meeting to talk about how do you get people energized around, in aggressive fashion, around the right to vote. And we had a lot of young people. So we had Alicia Garza, and we had Christina Jimenez from the United We Dream. And we had the Dream Defenders, Umi, who used to be Phillip Agnew and is now Umi, coming out of Trayvon Martin. And so we're all sitting there, SNCC veterans, talking about this is the way we organize, along with these young people who are amazing. The Ohio Students Association is amazing. There are all these groups. But what's amazing to me, and some of them are unfortunately really focused on just social media. So you have some people who really do think you can organize just through social media and not do the kind of grassroots, long-term organizing that you have to do to build real social change. But for the ones that we were talking to, Umi said while he was there, out of Trayvon Martin and Dream Defenders, he said, I just want to let everybody know here that we're going to be off media for the next 2 months. We're not going to be tweeting. We're not going to be on Facebook. We're not going to be. And he said, because we're trying to figure out how do we really think about grassroots community organizing. Now, I say that because what's amazing to me about the young people is that they understand that it's systemic. We got to that, certainly in SNCC as young people, we got to it at a certain point. We understood when John Lewis gives the SNCC speech, and it was a SNCC-authored speech, a lot of people worked on it. At the March on Washington, that first line says, we're sorry that more of our brothers are not here because they can't afford to be here at the 1963 March on Washington for jobs and freedom, jobs and freedom. And then later on, the SNCC speech says, what is there in this proposed 1964 Civil Rights Bill that will protect a maid making $2 a day in the home of a family making $70,000 a year?
So in other words,
now,
you would have an economic component.
You have an economic component, but we understood that it was systemic, but we got to it later than some of the young activists have done. They understand it's not just about getting rid of 1 or 2 or 3 police officers. It is about systemically getting rid of the racist underpinning that underpins that police department.
Structural.
Yes, structural.
I think I would be, I appreciate your remarks, Dara, but I do think that things have changed quite a bit. So I actually think it would start off with all of what the movement wrought. And within 50 years as a black president, there was 2 black attorney generals, elected officials, many more African Americans. Black American culture lionizes American culture. I mean, there's a lot to say. All of its babies, from the gay and lesbian rights movement to the immigration movement, all think about the civil rights movement as basically providing a prototype and a language. Indeed, social movements around the world look to the civil rights movement for kind of guidance and for just inspiration. It's certainly things are not where they should be, but we're in a different century. American capitalism is a lot different than it was in the 20th century. And what the lesson of Prize, it seems to me, is Eyes on the Prize, is that you have to move with the times, right? It demands that we be forward-looking, and that what African Americans have been in many times is seeing what's possible, right? Not only thinking about what we have here, but what's possible. And that seems to me is something that the third session of Eyes to Prize would be, right? Kind of the unfinished work, but we can stand on a lot of accomplishments. And I think that's what it would have to begin, right? Without being overly dramatic and romantic and, naive, right? But there's no point in not claiming, right, the victories that movement created, right?
No, you get the last word. No. You get the last word,
We're
Judy.
done.
This is really quick. One of the things that Eyes does is it shows how the black civil rights movement expands rights for everybody.
Right, precisely.
And so when you talk about that, when you look at the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, we're not just opening up the Democratic Party for black people. We're not just saying we don't want this all-white delegation from Mississippi to represent us.
Right.
We're also opening it up so that 8 years later, the Democratic Party says, oh, we will no longer allow all white delegations. The delegations that come now have to represent the districts that they are in.
Precisely.
All of that comes, all of the kind of laws, when you see people referring to the 13th and 14th, those amendments are expanding rights for everybody who comes on these shores. So, yeah.
How about another round of applause for Judy, Melissa, and Phillip. Great job. We could be here all night, but I know you all lead very busy lives. Just want to say special thanks to Jean Hopkins, to Liz Hagyard, Victoria Marsh, Hu-Chun Lee, Chris Hastings, and the WGBH and World Channel staff, who I see just there, for helping to produce this incredible evening. Please stay for a dessert reception and an opportunity to talk to all of us. We'll be hanging around. And volunteers will also be available to take you on a tour of the facilities of our studios. I know you all lead incredibly busy lives, and so we are eternally grateful that you chose to spend and share tonight with us. Thank you all very much.
I was 17 years old, as me and my brother, school had just let out for the summer, and we were wondering what we're gonna do for the summer, you know? And I certainly there was a job opening for selling cocaine that was always available, okay? So if I wanted to, I could sell drugs all summer. And as we were walking up Rutland Street, and the gentleman who was my first camp counselor at camp and taught me how to swim, he approached us and he says, "What are you two guys doing this summer?" We're like, he says, "Your camp counselors, pack your bags in 2 days." And my life took a positive turn from that moment on.